I'm Doug Booth. I'm a partner with Karl Marx Advisory Group, and what I'd like to do is talk a bit about what's called PACA, which is the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act of 1930. And that was intended as a law to set up a fair trade and market for perishable agricultural goods. It went through two different very important changes for what we want to cover today. First is in the 80s. It then became a trust, which means that the accounts receivable as well as the inventory values are held in trust for the benefit of those who sold the product. Secondly, in the 90s, the courts then ruled that the actual perfection of that contract is through the back of the purchase order, which gives the terms and the conditions. So PACA is actually a super priority claim in a troubled company or bankruptcy situation. Super priority above the senior secured lender, and therefore first out in the waterfall in a troubled company situation. In a troubled company situation, and particularly this pertains to canning companies, food processors, food distribution companies, as well as groceries. In a troubled company situation, understanding PACA becomes absolutely critical. Two different perspectives. First, from the lender perspective, where they are looking at the traditional borrowing base, and they need to look at the accounts receivable from the perspective of what they can actually have a claim against. PACA, again, actually is a priming claim above them, so they need to look at their collateral base from the perspective of what comes before them. And therefore, they should start adjusting what their exposure is, as well as when they look at it, the company from an orderly liquidation value or OLV, they need to discount the PACA claims against the company because they are not entitled to it. And if the company goes through a liquidating Chapter 11 or a sale through a 363 in a bankruptcy proceeding, those claims will be paid prior to the lender. So they need to be very sensitive to that. From the company side or the debtor side, it's a very similar situation. First is that they need to be aware that those claims do take precedent and therefore that they could see their borrowing base eroded by the lender because the lender has the exposure to them. So as they're looking at their forward cash plan and they're looking at what they're asking their lenders to support them in going forward from a liquidity point of view and a cash availability point of view, they have to recognize there's risk associated with the PACA claims, and they need to be able to understand that effectively. It's a problem with a troubled company because oftentimes they don't have the infrastructure to do that effectively. There's a very interesting recent case as it pertains to PACA, and that is after a company was sold through a 363 proceeding of the Bankruptcy Code, a group of PACA claimants came together who hadn't been paid, their claims hadn't been properly identified early on in the case, and successfully sued and pursued the professionals representing the company and got them to disgorge funds to cover their PACA claims. A highly unusual situation, but yet it speaks to the strength and the power of the PACA regulation as it pertains to a priming position in a bankruptcy case.